unshakable, uncompromising, and immovable, quietly slammed into reverse. A mass deportation plan, described as the largest enforcement operation in modern history, was halted before it even left the runway. The political fallout was immediate, loud, and deeply polarizing. Supporters called it betrayal, critics called it restraint, ministers called it inevitable. But to the public watching this unfold in real time, it looked like yet another moment where certainty evaporated under pressure. Tonight, we break down how a plan affecting hundreds of thousands went from ironclad promise to political dead end, and why the consequences may last far longer than the announcement itself. The language came first, and it was deliberately uncompromising. The message was simple, direct, and repeated until it felt absolute. Enter the country illegally, and you will be detained, deported, and barred from return. No ambiguity, no qualifying clauses. This framing mattered because it set expectations at a national level. It wasn't positioned as a discussion or a proposal, but as a line drawn firmly in the sand. Supporters heard resolve and clarity. Critics heard escalation and risk. What united both sides was the assumption that the government meant exactly what it said. In politics, that assumption is dangerous territory, because once the public internalizes certainty, any deviation feels like retreat rather than revision. And certainty only grows heavier when the numbers enter the picture. The scale of the plan transformed it from policy into spectacle. Estimates reached as high as 900,000 potential removals, a figure so vast it demanded extraordinary logistics. Naval patrols, detention capacity, transport coordination, and enforcement manpower were all cited as necessary components. Comparisons were drawn to national mobilization, not routine administration. That comparison carried weight because it implied urgency and exceptional authority. For supporters, this scale suggested control finally catching up with reality. For critics, it raised immediate questions about feasibility, legality, and proportionality. Large numbers create large expectations, and large expectations magnify failure when delivery falters. From this moment, the plan could no longer shrink quietly without consequences. Those consequences arrived faster than anyone expected. The halt came abruptly, and that abruptness became the story. Rather than gradual modification or partial approval, the proposal was rejected outright. Legal barriers were cited immediately, with emphasis on human rights obligations and international commitments. The reasoning may have been consistent with existing frameworks, but the timing felt jarring. To many observers, the reversal appeared less like due process and more like an emergency stop. That perception mattered. When a policy is sold as non-negotiable and then abandoned wholesale, the public doesn't see nuance, it sees contradiction. Even those sympathetic to the legal arguments questioned why such obstacles were not addressed before expectations were raised. Public reaction was never going to remain theoretical. Demonstrations gathered quickly, fueled by frustration rather than organization. The mood outside Parliament hardened as chants shifted from demands for explanation to accusations of betrayal. Police presence increased not because violence was inevitable, but because volatility was. This moment marked a shift from policy disagreement to emotional confrontation. People were no longer debating legal frameworks, they were reacting to a perceived breach of trust. When crowds gather under that sentiment, the risk escalates rapidly. The state becomes the focal point, not the issue itself. This is where political decisions leave briefing rooms and enter lived experience. As night fell, tension gave way to disorder. The evening saw scenes that underscored how quickly instability can spread. Fireworks were launched, objects thrown, and police lines reinforced. Emergency responses intensified around key sites, including accommodation facilities linked to the wider debate. The optics were stark. To many watching, it looked as though enforcement capacity was being deployed everywhere except where it had been promised. That contrast fed resentment. Whether fair or not, perception hardened into narrative. Once disorder enters the frame, policy arguments lose oxygen, authority becomes the currency, and control becomes the currency. From there, the argument pivoted sharply. Supporters of the Halted plan leant heavily on statistics, citing violent offences, organised exploitation, and overstretched policing. Their argument was framed as practical rather than ideological. They claimed the system was mathematically unsustainable, pointing to delayed removals and lengthy appeals. Critics challenged both the interpretation and application of those figures, warning against correlation being presented as causation. But the damage was already done. Crime, once introduced, reframes debate emotionally. It shifts focus from rights and law to fear and safety. At that point, moderation becomes politically expensive. Fear, however, does not always speak loudly. A narrative emerged around silent opinion. Polling suggested that views expressed privately were far stronger than those voiced publicly. The idea gained traction that many felt constrained from speaking openly, whether through social pressure or professional risk. Whether overstated or not, the belief itself carried power. When people think they are unheard, disengagement follows. Disengagement erodes legitimacy. In this environment, even lawful decisions are interpreted through suspicion because trust has already thinned. Suspicion soon turned toward the legal system itself. Legal frameworks moved center stage as critics argued that enforcement was paralyzed by appeals and external rulings. Sovereignty became the key word, raised repeatedly as a symbol rather than a statute. Proposals to withdraw from international oversight were floated as solutions, while opponents warned of long-term consequences that could not be undone. This clash wasn't technical, it was philosophical. It asked whether restraint protects democracy or weakens it. Once that question is posed, compromise becomes exceptionally difficult. Then the economic reality sharpened the edge. Costs associated with accommodation, administration, and legal processing became central talking points. Local authorities described stretched budgets and communities under strain. For residents, these weren't abstract figures, but visible changes. Empty hotels, reduced services, rising tension. When economic pressure intersects with cultural anxiety, resentment grows roots quickly. This is where national debates become local grievances, and local grievances rarely stay quiet. Which leaves the final reckoning. This moment was never just about deportation. It became a test of whether the state can set a direction and hold it under pressure. One side fears paralysis disguised as principle. The other fears force disguised as control. Between them sits a public increasingly skeptical of promises delivered without preparation. The plan may be halted, but the divide it exposed remains active, unresolved, and politically combustible. So now the question sits with you. Was this a necessary legal stand or a promise made without a path to deliver it? Share your view below, keep the discussion measured, and follow @BritainVoice for clear, unsensational coverage when the headlines move faster than the explanations.